Varzia do Destino, an isolated village steeped in folklore and devoutly religious traditions, surrounded by hills that trap an ever-present mist. In the village square, an ancient statue stands, looming and mysterious. Recently, the locals have become terrified, believing that the statue has started weeping blood, its marble eyes streaked with dark, viscous trails that seem to flow at the faintest hint of dawn. As more people witness the strange phenomenon, rumors of curses and imminent death ripple through the village like a plague. As Lazarus arrives, he senses an unnatural chill in the air, sharper than the autumn cold. The sky is heavy gray, seeming to close in as if it could collapse at any moment. A feeling of dread snakes its way through him, its claws gripping tighter with each step he takes toward the statue, which the locals say has cursed anyone who dares to look into its eyes. Drawn by morbid curiosity, Lazarus is eager to capture the phenomenon with his lens. However, the villagers keep their distance, some even muttering prayers under their breath, averting their gazes as though the statue's very sight would burn their souls. Lazarus approaches the statue, feeling the weight of countless stares from the villagers watching him with a blend of horror and fascination. The statue, a towering figure with a blank hollow face, is streaked with fresh trails of what appears to be blood. He crouches to take a closer shot, noticing that the tears haven't dried even in the brisk wind. He feels as though the statue is watching him back, those lifeless eyes peering deep into him, chilling him to his core. His pulse quickens, but he remains steady, capturing image after image. It's as if the camera itself struggles against him, each shutter click echoing with an ominous finality. As he stands, a wrinkled old man approaches him, his face etched with terror. "Don't look into its eyes, boy," the old man warns, his voice a shaky whisper. "It remembers everyone who does. And it never forgets." That night, Lazarus finds himself plagued by a vivid, bone-chilling dream. He's alone in the heart of Varzia do Destino's deserted village square, bathed in an unnatural pale moonlight that seems to flicker as if under the influence of something unseen. The air is thick and damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood, and every sound is swallowed by an oppressive silence that weighs heavy, making every breath feel labored. He feels a pull, something deep and primal, drawing his gaze toward the statue, though every instinct screams for him to look away. In the dream, the statue stands taller, more menacing than in reality, as if it had grown overnight, its surface shimmering under the moonlight with a slick, dark sheen. Lazarus can't move, as though the earth beneath him has turned to cement. Cold sweat beads on his forehead, and he realizes he's clutching his camera tightly, yet no matter how hard he tries, he cannot bring it to his eye to take a photo. It's as if some unseen force has bound him, holding him hostage in this macabre silence. Suddenly, he hears faint whispers, guttural and distant, like voices trapped between worlds, echoing around the square. They seem to call his name, each repetition growing sharper, closer, until it feels like they're coming from the statue itself. With dread pooling in his stomach, Lazarus looks up, locking eyes with the hollow gaze of the statue. To his horror, he notices that the dark trails beneath its eyes have thickened, transforming into fresh, oozing streaks that pulse as if alive. The statue's expression seems to shift, its blank face curling into a distorted sneer, almost human but profoundly wrong, filled with an ancient malevolence. Blood drips from its eyes, splattering onto the stone ground in rhythmic beats that match the pounding of his own heart. He wants to scream, but no sound comes out, his voice trapped as he stands paralyzed, every inch of him weighed down by terror. Suddenly, he feels a cold, bony hand on his shoulder. He jerks around, expecting to see someone, or something, standing behind him, but there's no one there. The whispers grow louder, morphing into a single voice, raspy and low, "You're part of me now." The phrase repeats over and over, echoing through the square, each repetition chilling him to his core. The pressure on his shoulder tightens, icy fingers pressing into his skin, and he gasps as he realizes that the statue's face has shifted again, this time bearing a sinister smile that feels disturbingly familiar. The blood from its eyes begins to form words on the stone, spelling out his name over and over, as if binding him to something unspeakable. With a violent jolt, Lazarus awakens, drenched in sweat, his heart racing as though he's run a marathon. His hands shake as he reaches for his shoulder, the cold phantom sensation of the statue's touch lingering like a burn on his skin. For a moment, he's tempted to believe it was only a dream, a figment of his mind twisted by the eerie tales whispered in Varzia do Destino. But as he gets up, he feels something sticky on his hand and looks down to see a faint smear of blood on his fingertips. The terror floods back, sharper and colder, as he realizes that the line between nightmare and reality may have already begun to blur. The following day, Lazarus is drawn back to the statue, his mind haunted by the eerie remnants of the dream. The village square seems different, darker somehow, as though a shadow hangs over it, sapping the light from even the brightest part of the morning. The villagers watch him cautiously from their windows, whispers floating through the air like secrets carried on the wind. They glance at him with eyes full of warning, some with pity, others with barely concealed fear, as though they know he's already been marked by something far older and crueler than he can understand. As he approaches the statue, he notices fresh, dark stains beneath its eyes. The blood seems thicker, almost coagulated, giving the statue an even more grotesque, mournful appearance. He raises his camera, hoping to capture some trace of the mystery that clings to the stone, but his camera malfunctions once again, its lens refusing to focus. A chill runs through him as he stares at the statue's face, realizing that each time he glances away, it seems to shift ever so slightly, like it's breathing, watching, judging him with eyes that should be lifeless yet feel disturbingly alive. The air grows heavy with an intense, unplaceable scent, metallic and faintly rotten, like the stale blood from his dream. Lazarus's pulse quickens as he becomes aware of an odd silence pressing down around him, an unnatural quiet that seems to consume every sound, even his own breathing. The usual noises of the village, children playing, distant conversations, the occasional bark of a dog have vanished, leaving only the statue and the pounding of his heart. It's as though he and the statue are locked in a private, malevolent silence, a moment suspended between two worlds. Suddenly, the ground beneath him feels uneven, shifting subtly as if the earth itself resents his presence. A gust of icy wind sweeps through the square, prickling his skin with a strange, static-like sensation. Lazarus glances around, feeling as if dozens of invisible eyes are watching him. He can't shake the sensation that he's being followed, though the square is completely empty. Shadows seem to stretch and ripple along the ground, creeping closer with every step he takes, dark fingers reaching out as if to pull him into their depths. Just as he begins to retreat, he hears a sound, a faint, agonized whisper, unmistakably coming from the statue. The voice is faint, almost inaudible, but the pain in it is raw, tangible, filling the air with a sorrow that sends chills down his spine. The words are garbled, twisted, but he can just make out the phrase, "Help me, release me." The statue's expression shifts again, this time bearing a look of such despair that it's almost human. Lazarus's hands tremble as he realizes he's not just witnessing a phenomenon, he's intruding on a ritual, something dark and ancient that should never have been disturbed. In a sudden burst of courage or madness, Lazarus moves closer, his heart racing, his breath shallow. As he stares into the hollow, bloody eyes of the statue, he feels a cold tendril wrap around his mind, probing his thoughts, his memories, like fingers sifting through his soul. A fragment of a memory he doesn't recognize flashes before his eyes. A figure in the same village square, long ago, kneeling in front of the statue, crying tears of blood, their face twisted in horror and regret. The memory is so vivid, so visceral, that Lazarus stumbles backward, almost losing his balance. Shaken, he tears his gaze from the statue, his mind reeling from the vision. His body feels weighed down, his limbs numb as though the statue has drained him of something essential, something he'll never get back. With his heart still pounding, he staggers away, desperate to escape the suffocating grasp of the square. But as he leaves, he can feel the statue's gaze on his back, a silent promise that he has not escaped, only postponed the inevitable. That night, Lazarus drifts into an uneasy sleep, haunted by shadows that linger at the edges of his consciousness. It's as though something malevolent has slithered into his dreams, an unseen presence lurking in the darkness, waiting. He finds himself back in Varzia do Destino's village square, the cold moonlight casting an unnatural glow over the scene. The statue stands at the center, looming even taller, its blood-stained face glistening under the pale light, almost as if it's alive and watching him with silent, sinister intent. He's trapped in the dream, aware of its unreality, yet unable to wake himself. As he approaches, the statue's eyes seem to follow him, its expression shifting to a look of twisted recognition, a look that chills him to his core. Lazarus takes a step back, but the statue's gaze tightens its hold on him, compelling him forward, drawing him in as though it were a living being. The whispers return, louder and more urgent this time, like tortured souls clawing their way up from beneath the earth. They repeat his name in distorted, agonizing tones, and each repetition brings with it a flood of despair, pressing down on him like a weight he can't escape. Suddenly, a sharp metallic taste fills his mouth, and he realizes he's biting down on his own lip, blood trickling down his chin. He's paralyzed, every fiber of his being screaming to turn away, but he's rooted to the spot, helpless against the invisible chains binding him to the statue. The statue's eyes darken, its face contorting into a grotesque smile, and he feels a chilling wave of dread as the marble lips slowly begin to part. From deep within its stone throat comes a sound, a low rasping growl, as though something long buried is struggling to speak through the stone. In an instant, Lazarus is overwhelmed by a flood of visions, memories that aren't his own, scenes of horror and despair, of people falling to their knees before the statue, their faces twisted in agony. He sees the figure of a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks, reaching out to the statue before collapsing, lifeless, her eyes wide and empty. The visions bleed together, each one more horrific than the last, and Lazarus realizes, with mounting terror, that every victim had gazed into the statue's eyes, just as he had. The knowledge hits him like a hammer, cold and brutal. He's bound to this curse, just like they were, each step bringing him closer to a fate he cannot escape. As he reaches out in a desperate attempt to break free, the world around him fractures, shattering into darkness. He gasps, jolting awake, his room cloaked in an eerie stillness. His heart pounds, and he struggles to catch his breath, the shadows in the corners of his room seeming to pulse with a life of their own. It's only a dream, he tells himself, but when he looks down at his hands, they're stained with blood, thick, dark, and unmistakable. A chill runs through him as he remembers the statuesque woman from his vision, her lifeless eyes mirroring his own horror. Lazarus stumbles out of bed, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he splashes water on his face, desperate to wash away the lingering touch of the nightmare. But no matter how hard he scrubs, the cold, sticky feeling clings to him, as if the blood is a mark of ownership. He turns to look in the mirror, his reflection pale and hollow-eyed, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he sees the statue's face staring back at him from within his own features. The blood trails beneath its eyes mirror his own, and he realizes with a gut-wrenching certainty that the curse is already taking hold. In a panic, Lazarus stumbles back, but the room around him is suffused with a dark, pulsing energy, as though the very walls are watching, closing in on him. He hears the voice from his dream, raspy, venomous, whispering in his ear, "You're mine now." The phrase repeats, growing louder and more insistent, each word clawing into his mind like icy fingers. He tries to scream, but his voice is trapped, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that fills the room. The nightmare has seeped into reality, and he's caught in its grip, bound to a fate as chilling and inevitable as the curse that now claims him. The morning after his latest nightmare, Lazarus wakes to a silence that feels suffocating. The air is dense, still, almost as though it's waiting. A vague, dull ache lingers in his temples, and his body feels unnaturally heavy, as if some unseen weight presses down on him. He tries to shake off the remnants of the nightmare, but every time he closes his eyes, he can still see the statue's face, twisted and blood-stained, etched vividly into his mind. Driven by a compulsion he can't explain, he decides to investigate the statue's history, hoping to find something, anything, that might help him break free from its grip. Lazarus heads to the town's dusty library, a decrepit building that feels frozen in time, untouched by modernity. As he steps inside, a wave of cold washes over him, prickling his skin and stirring the hairs on the back of his neck. The dim lights flicker erratically, casting long, warped shadows that seem to shift when he's not looking. He approaches the library's aging historian, a frail, elderly woman with milky eyes that never quite meet his gaze. Her voice is a dry whisper as she warns him, "Some histories are better left buried. Not everything can be undone." Ignoring her cryptic warning, Lazarus scours the archives, sifting through pages thick with dust and age. Hours pass, and finally, buried within brittle yellowed newspapers, he finds an article that stops him cold. It details a series of mysterious deaths in the village over a century ago, all tied to an unnamed craftsman who sculpted the statue. The report describes him as a quiet, reserved man, consumed by his work, who vanished shortly after completing the statue. His disappearance was followed by a string of tragedies. Anyone who dared look into the statue's eyes suffered grisly, unexplained deaths. Some were found with faces contorted in terror, others with dark streaks of blood trailing from their eyes. Heart-pounding, Lazarus flips through more articles, uncovering stories from across decades, each detailing similar fates of those drawn to the statue. A chilling pattern emerges. Everyone who dared investigate the statue or even spent too long gazing into its eyes was marked, seemingly chosen for something sinister. He realizes with growing horror that these victims were all connected, not by blood, but by fate, each one caught in a cycle that began with the craftsman's disappearance. Just as he begins to understand the scope of the curse, Lazarus notices an odd smudge on his fingertips. It's faint but unmistakable, a dark, sticky residue that he recognizes instantly as blood. His breath catches, and he stumbles back, heart hammering as he looks around the library, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him. In the eerie silence, he realizes that the curse has already begun to seep into his reality, marking him as its next victim. The blood on his fingers pulses with a life of its own, warm and cold in turns, a grotesque reminder that he's trapped in a cycle beyond his control. Desperation drives him to seek out an old, abandoned chapel on the outskirts of town, hoping to find records kept by the village's former priests, rumored to have been the only ones who understood the full scope of the curse. The chapel is shrouded in shadow, its walls cracked and crumbling, and as he steps inside, the cold intensifies, pressing against his skin like a warning. On the altar, he finds a weathered journal, its cover marked with symbols he doesn't recognize, each page filled with haunting sketches of the statue, some with eyes bleeding, others with faces twisted in expressions of agony. Leafing through, he finds the final entry written by the last priest to tend the chapel, a man who vanished shortly after these words were penned. The curse binds all who look upon it with yearning or fear. It hungers for souls who seek its secrets. Only those willing to accept their fate will be spared the full measure of its wrath. Lazarus's fingers tremble as he absorbs the words, and an icy realization sets in. His curiosity, his fixation, has sealed his fate, binding him to the curse as surely as chains. Stepping back, he feels the chapel's shadows creeping around him, thickening, as if the statue's influence has reached even here. His own face reflected in the chapel's broken window appears distorted, dark streaks trailing from his eyes like the cursed blood he has come to fear. A whisper echoes in the cold silence, faint yet unmistakable. "You are one of us now." The chapel's air grows dense, suffocating, and Lazarus stumbles out, the reality of his situation sinking in. His world has begun to twist around the curse, blending nightmare and waking life, leaving him unable to tell where the terror ends, or if it ever will. As days pass, Lazarus's sense of reality deteriorates. The boundary between dream and waking life blurs, leaving him trapped in a perpetual haze of fear and confusion. Every shadow seems to whisper his name, every distant noise sounds like the statue's low, guttural call echoing in his mind. Desperate to understand what has ensnared him, he begins a frantic search through the village, hoping someone, anyone, might know how to sever the curse's hold. But the villagers avoid his gaze, crossing themselves or muttering prayers when he approaches, as though he carries a contagious affliction. They know he's already been marked, and their silence fills him with dread. One night, unable to bear the weight of his isolation, Lazarus seeks out Father Estevao, an elderly priest who lives in solitude on the outskirts of Varzia do Destino. Estevao is a gaunt, hollow-eyed man, known for his knowledge of the village's darkest secrets. As Lazarus enters the priest's dimly lit cabin, he feels an immediate chill. The air is thick with the scent of burnt incense and faint traces of blood, as though rituals long forgotten still cling to the walls. The priest eyes him with a mixture of pity and caution, as if Lazarus is a dead man walking. After hearing Lazarus's story, Father Estevao sighs, his voice a grave whisper. "You have looked too deeply into the statue's eyes. It is an ancient vessel, crafted to contain something beyond human comprehension, something that feeds on curiosity, on fear. The more you seek, the tighter its grip becomes." The priest leans forward, his eyes glassy with fear. "You must stop, Lazarus. If you don't, it will consume you entirely, binding you to its will." But Lazarus feels a stubborn defiance burning within him. He needs to know what the statue wants, why it chose him, even if it means risking everything. He pleads for more information, for any way to break free, but Estevao's face hardens. There is only one way out, and it comes at a price. Frustrated and terrified, Lazarus leaves the cabin, clutching the fragments of information Estevao revealed, his mind reeling with a toxic mixture of hope and fear. He realizes he must face the curse head-on, confront the thing lurking within the statue. That night, the nightmares return, more vivid and torturous than ever before. In the dreams, he wanders the village square, where the statue's face changes, morphing into that of each villager he has seen, their eyes weeping blood, their mouths forming silent screams of despair. Each face is a warning, a sign of what he's becoming, and he knows he's running out of time. The following day, Lazarus's desperation drives him to confront a villager known only as Dona Vera, an elderly woman rumored to have knowledge of ancient curses and dark rites. Her house sits at the edge of the village, shrouded in ivy and overgrown trees, hidden from curious eyes. She welcomes him with a grim smile, her gaze lingering too long, as though she's measuring the weight of his soul. "You've looked into the eyes, haven't you?" she murmurs, her voice brittle as dried leaves. Lazarus nods, swallowing hard, and she gestures for him to sit. She warns him, her voice thick with dread, that the statue's curse can't be broken, only transferred, and that this transfer requires a ritual of unimaginable darkness. She reveals that the curse was born from a man's despair, that the statue was a prison for a soul damned to suffer eternally. It's hungry, she whispers. It needs the life force of those who seek its secrets to sustain itself, to keep the spirit within bound to its fate. Lazarus's heart sinks as he realizes the full horror of his predicament. He is no longer just a witness, but a vessel slowly filling with the spirit suffering. Each step toward understanding has chained him tighter to the curse, every question bringing him closer to a fate intertwined with the statue's dark purpose. As Dona Vera speaks, she warns Lazarus that the only way to truly escape is to transfer the curse onto another, to pass the burden before it consumes him fully. The suggestion fills him with revulsion, but her eyes glint with something sinister, as though she's daring him to consider the unthinkable. If you truly wish to live, you must choose, she intones. You must pass it on, or it will claim you. The weight of her words fills him with dread, the realization sinking in that he faces an impossible choice: condemn another soul or embrace the slow, agonizing demise awaiting him. Tormented by the decision, Lazarus stumbles out of her home, the darkness of his fate closing in around him. He knows he can't live with himself if he dooms another to his nightmare, yet the terror of facing the curse alone gnaws at his resolve. Every sound feels amplified, every shadow elongated, as if the statue itself watches, waiting for him to make his choice. His pulse races, his breath shallow, and he realizes with a sick certainty that whatever he decides, he's already lost a part of himself to the curse. The night is thick with an unnatural darkness as Lazarus prepares for his final confrontation with the statue, his mind weighed down by dread and uncertainty. He moves through the empty streets of Varzea do Destino, the silence around him broken only by the faint rustle of wind through the trees, as if the village itself is holding its breath. The villagers have retreated into their homes, doors locked, windows shut tight. They know what he is about to face, and they want no part in the horror that awaits him. Lazarus feels the weight of their collective fear pressing down on him, adding to the gnawing terror growing within. He arrives at the square, now cloaked in shadow, the moon barely piercing the heavy clouds above. The statue stands at its center, a silent sentinel, its form seeming to loom higher in the darkness, as if it has grown, fed by the fears of those who have looked upon it. Lazarus's heart pounds as he approaches, his every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to flee from the unnatural presence radiating from the stone. But he is past the point of no return. Something deeper than curiosity or terror drives him forward, a need to know, to confront whatever darkness has bound itself to his soul. As he stands before the statue, he feels an intense pressure building in the air, thick and suffocating. The statue's eyes seem to glow faintly in the darkness, twin orbs of deep, unnatural red, almost as if it is weeping fresh blood. The sight sends a shiver down his spine, but he cannot look away. His gaze locks with the statue's, and for a moment, he feels as though he is falling into its eyes, spiraling down into an endless void where time and reality blur. The whispers return, louder this time, echoing within his mind, filling every corner of his consciousness with voices twisted by pain and despair. Suddenly, the statue's face begins to shift, its features contorting into a grotesque, almost human expression, twisted in agony and malice. The eyes narrow, fixing on him with a gaze so intense that it feels as if the statue is alive, as if it is peering into the very depths of his soul. Lazarus feels a chill creep up his spine as he realizes the truth. The statue is not merely a cursed object but a prison, a vessel for something far darker, a spirit bound by a ritual older than the village itself, hungry for freedom, for revenge. Without warning, the statue's mouth opens, releasing a low guttural growl that reverberates through the square, shaking him to his core. The sound is not merely a noise, it is a feeling, a vibration that penetrates his bones, filling him with an overwhelming sense of dread. He feels an intense pull, as if the statue is drawing him closer, binding him to it, chaining his very essence to its curse. In that moment, he understands the full horror of the statue's power. It has chosen him as its next vessel, its next victim, and there is no escaping its grasp. As he stands, paralyzed by terror, the spirit within the statue speaks, its voice a rasping whisper that echoes in his mind. "You sought me out," it hisses. "You looked into my eyes. Now you are mine." The words send a wave of icy fear through him, and he realizes with mounting horror that he has willingly walked into his own doom. He tries to move, to break free from the statue's hold, but his body feels frozen, bound by an invisible force that tightens with every heartbeat. His vision blurs, and in the darkness, he sees flashes of the past. Visions of the statue's creation, of the tormented craftsman who poured his anguish into the stone, binding his soul to it in a ritual of despair. The spirit's voice grows louder, filling his mind with its twisted laughter. "I have waited," it whispers, "for one foolish enough to seek my secrets. And now, you will take my place." Lazarus feels a crushing weight settle upon him, pressing him down as if the earth itself is swallowing him whole. His chest tightens, his breath shallow, and he realizes with a sick certainty that he is not merely cursed. He is being consumed, his life force drained to feed the spirit's endless hunger. In a final desperate act, Lazarus summons all his remaining strength and reaches into his pocket, pulling out a small, silver cross, a memento from his childhood, a gift from his late mother. He clutches it tightly, the metal biting into his skin, grounding him, giving him a glimmer of strength amidst the overwhelming darkness. He lifts the cross toward the statue, his voice barely a whisper. "You will not take me," he gasps, the words a defiant plea against the tide of horror closing in. The spirit recoils, its voice twisting into a howl of rage that echoes through the night, shaking the very ground beneath him. For a brief, agonizing moment, Lazarus feels the statue's grip weaken, its hold loosening just enough for him to stumble back. The air around him vibrates with an unnatural energy, and he realizes that he has only moments before the statue's curse pulls him back, its hunger unrelenting, its thirst for life insatiable. With a final desperate burst of strength, he tears his gaze from the statue's eyes and turns, fleeing into the darkness, the spirit's furious screams echoing behind him. He doesn't stop running until he reaches the edge of the village, his heart pounding, his breath ragged. The curse still clings to him, a cold, lingering presence that whispers of unfinished business, of a fate he narrowly escaped but cannot outrun forever. As he collapses to the ground, his body trembling, he realizes the terrifying truth: the statue's curse will never truly release him. He has escaped for now, but its eyes will follow him, its voice will haunt his dreams, a reminder that he is forever bound to the darkness he dared to confront. And as he lies there, consumed by fear and exhaustion, he knows that the true horror has only just begun. Days pass, but Lazarus finds no relief. Each night brings a fresh nightmare, vivid and relentless, blurring his grip on reality. The village feels different now, colder and more detached, as if it's rejected him for surviving his encounter with the statue. When he tries to speak to the villagers about what he experienced, they avoid his gaze, some even stepping back as though he carries a contagious darkness. Whispers follow him wherever he goes, hushed voices calling him marked, and children run from him, frightened by the haunted look in his eyes. The weight of the curse is a silent but relentless presence, a shadow that follows him into every corner of his life. One night, exhausted from sleeplessness, he sits alone in his room, clutching the silver cross that once provided him with fleeting strength. Yet tonight, it feels colder than usual, as though the curse has crept into its very metal, corrupting the last relic of his hope. He glances at his reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall, but his face looks unfamiliar, drawn, pale, and haunted by shadows that seem to shift and ripple beneath his skin. As he stares, the reflection twists, and for a brief horrifying moment, he sees the statue staring back at him, its hollow eyes glistening with dark, wet streaks that trace down its cheeks like blood. He blinks and the image is gone, leaving only his own face, yet the unsettling feeling remains. He is not alone, even in his own mind. Desperate, Lazarus decides to leave Varzia do Destino. He packs his belongings, hoping that distance might weaken the curse's grip, that the horrors haunting him will fade like a bad memory. As he reaches the edge of the village, however, an eerie sensation stops him in his tracks. The air grows cold, and a familiar metallic scent drifts through the air, the scent of blood. He turns to look back, and there, at the far end of the road, he sees the silhouette of the statue, standing tall, watching him, even though it should be rooted in the village square. His heart races, a cold sweat breaking over him as he realizes with mounting dread that he cannot escape. The statue is bound to him, no matter where he goes. That night, he drives for hours, not daring to stop, the road stretching endlessly beneath his headlights. He tries to focus on the road, but shadows flicker at the edges of his vision, twisting into shapes that resemble the statue's face, taunting him with hollow, blood-filled eyes. At one point, he glances in the rearview mirror, and for a split second he sees it, sitting in the back seat, silent, immovable, its face tilted slightly toward him in a mockery of a grin. He jerks the car, swerving off the road in a panic, breathing heavily as he realizes it's not there. But the damage is done. The line between dream and reality has dissolved completely. As he sits in his car on the desolate roadside, a single thought crystallizes in his mind: there is no escaping the curse. The statue is with him now, woven into his very being, a shadow that no distance can sever. His mind races with a new, terrible possibility. Perhaps he could break the curse, transfer it as Dona Vera had whispered, by marking another soul in his place. The thought fills him with both dread and temptation. Could he condemn someone else to this nightmare? The question haunts him, twisting his conscience, the weight of his own survival balanced against the life of another. The next day, he returns to Varzia do Destino, defeated but resolved, knowing he must face whatever remains of his fate head-on. The villagers' stares are colder now, wary, as if they sense the darkness clinging to him like a shroud. One elderly woman, eyes clouded with fear, mutters under her breath as he passes, "The statue has chosen its vessel." Her words echo in his mind, chilling him, and he realizes that he is now tied to this place, a permanent extension of the curse. The statue had been waiting, watching, and he had fulfilled its ancient, unspoken need by becoming its living link to the world of the living. That night, standing alone in the square once more, he gazes up at the statue. The moon casts an eerie glow over its face, and he feels the chilling certainty that it is still watching him, whispering his name in the silence. He can almost hear it, a faint, desperate plea that coils around him, pulling him back into the nightmare that has become his reality. The village is quiet, and he knows that from this moment on, his life will be a constant vigil, forever tethered to the statue's silent, insatiable hunger. With no clear way out, Lazarus finally speaks, his voice a trembling whisper, "What do you want from me?" But only the stillness of the night answers, and he realizes the horror of his own fate. There will be no answers, only the endless torment of wondering what will come next, the creeping fear of when the statue might choose to claim him fully. As he stands there, trapped in a prison of terror he can never escape, a thought emerges. If you were in my place, would you sacrifice another to save yourself, or would you face the darkness alone? As Lazarus stands alone in the moonlit square, the silence around him grows dense, almost tangible, pressing against him like a weight he cannot shake. The air is colder than ever, filled with an eerie stillness that feels unnatural, as if the world itself is holding its breath. His gaze drifts once more to the statue, its hollow eyes locked onto him, bleeding dark streaks that shimmer in the moonlight. He can feel it now more than ever, a pull, an insidious whisper that coils around his mind, blurring the boundary between his thoughts and something far darker. It's as though the statue has crawled inside his very being, a malignant presence lurking within, watching, waiting. Over the next few days, Lazarus's life becomes a waking nightmare. He tries to go through the motions, eating, sleeping, even speaking to the villagers, but their faces all blur together, lifeless and blank, as if they are nothing more than shadows of the curse that now clings to him. Each night, he dreams of the statue, standing at the foot of his bed, its cold gaze piercing him in the darkness, whispering secrets in a voice that sounds like his own. He wakes drenched in sweat, gasping, only to find faint traces of blood on his fingertips, as if the curse is manifesting in his body, marking him as the statue's unwilling servant. Desperation leads him to document his experiences, hoping that by putting his nightmares into words, he can somehow understand what is happening to him. He writes feverishly, his journal filling with sketches of the statue's haunting eyes, phrases that come to him in dreams, half-formed thoughts that seem to be written by a hand not entirely his own. The words become darker, twisted, filling page after page with cryptic warnings and visions of things that cannot be real. He realizes with mounting horror that he is losing himself, his mind slipping away into the abyss, merging with the curse that has bound itself to his soul. One evening, as he walks through the square, he catches sight of a stranger, a young woman, a tourist drawn to the village by whispers of the statue's mystery. She stands before the statue, her gaze fixed on its face, her expression curious, almost reverent. Lazarus's heart races, his pulse pounding in his ears as he watches her, a horrifying realization dawning on him. He could pass the curse to her. All he would have to do is share what he knows, to tell her the statue's secrets, to make her look into those hollow eyes and awaken the ancient hunger within. He steps forward, opening his mouth to speak, but something stops him, a faint memory of who he was before the curse took hold, a reminder of his humanity. His hand trembles as he pulls back, watching her walk away, blissfully unaware of the darkness she narrowly escaped. But as she fades into the distance, Lazarus feels a surge of anger from within, an insistent whisper that gnaws at his thoughts, mocking his restraint, pushing him to give in. The statue's voice fills his mind, urging him to act, to surrender, to embrace the darkness that has consumed him. And for a moment he feels himself weaken, a part of him drawn to the idea of release, to let go and escape the nightmare, even at the cost of another's soul. In the end, Lazarus returns to his lonely room, his mind racing, filled with conflicting thoughts that tear at his sanity. He can feel the statue's presence even here, lurking in the shadows, a constant reminder of his fate. The shadows seem to move on their own, stretching and twisting, reaching toward him with cold, invisible fingers that caress his skin, leaving a trail of ice in their wake. He shivers, clutching his arms, and realizes the truth. He is no longer merely haunted. He is claimed, a vessel for a curse that will haunt him until it consumes him entirely. That night, he dreams of the village square, but this time he stands beside the statue, his own face reflected in its cold, stone features, twisted and hollow, eyes bleeding as they once did in life. His mouth opens, and a voice, his voice yet something else, whispers a dark promise into the silence. I am bound. I am eternal. And I will wait. The terror grips him, deeper than anything he has felt before, as he realizes that he has become a part of the curse, a link in an unbreakable chain that stretches back centuries, binding him to the statue's sinister will. Lazarus wakes, his body cold, his mind fractured, haunted by the revelation. He knows now that he is trapped, bound to Varzia do Destino, unable to escape the curse that has claimed him. The villagers watch him from afar, their eyes filled with pity and fear, aware of the darkness that clings to him. And as he stands in the square once more, gazing up at the statue, he hears the faintest whisper, a voice that is his own, echoing from within the stone, promising vengeance, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to look too deeply into its eyes. Would you risk learning the secrets of the statue, knowing the curse that binds all who come too close? Share your thoughts below. Could you resist the temptation, or would you be the next to look into its eyes? Like, subscribe, and join us as we explore more terrifying mysteries like this one.